What drivers and especially attorneys need to look at closely, what type of lawsuits are filed where. For example, if they're filing a lawsuit in the United Kingdom over racially discriminatory facial recognition ID checks, you know that we have the same ID checks going on here. So are they doing the same in the United States? My guess is 99% of the time, yes. And then we have to pounce on them. So it works both ways. The UK should look at the cases, the lawsuits that are filed throughout Europe, in the United States, South Africa, South America, act on it, and vice versa. So I hope that some law firms or even drivers start looking into this a little bit more closely. Is this going on in California? Is this going on in Texas? Is this going on in Utah? Is this going on in New York? Band together, get together, file the lawsuits, because you should never, ever tolerate racism towards you, right? No matter what color you are, no matter what religion, right? Absolutely never, ever tolerate racism by these companies, right? So Uber, once again, in the hot seat every single day the fires are being lit in, right? They don't even have enough fire engines and firemen to put these fires out. That's how fast Uber and Lyft start these new cases, right, against them. They get sued left, right, and center. You know why? Because they go out, they do the shenanigans, and they think, nah, maybe we're going to get away with it. Listen, we're too smart for you. Eventually, all the crap comes out, it catches up to you, and we file the lawsuits, and you end up paying more in damages. So ride-hailing giant Uber is facing another legal challenge over its use of real-time facial recognition technology in a driver and courier identity check system that it uses in the UK. Maybe in the United States as well. Maybe in Africa as well. Maybe all around the globe. The App Drivers and Couriers Union, ADCU, announced the legal action Tuesday alleging that Uber's biometric identity checks discriminate against people of color. There we go. The union said it's taking the action after the unfair dismissal of a former Uber driver, Imran Raja, and a former Uber Eats courier, Pai Drissa Manjang, following failed checks using the facial recognition technology. Commenting in a statement, Yassim Aslam, happens to be a friend of mine, president of the ADCU. Now, this is a union you guys want to support in the UK, right? Because this is a union by drivers for the drivers, not that other nonsense that's out there, right? GMB or whatever they call themselves. They're in bed with Uber, right? You want to join the ADCU. That's who I endorse. I don't endorse that other union. Last year, Uber made a big claim that it was an anti-racist company and challenged all who tolerate racism to delete the app. But rather than root out racism, Uber has bedded into its systems, and workers face discrimination daily as a result. The ADCU is launching a crowd justice campaign to help fund the legal action, which it said is also being supported by the Equality and Human Rights Commission and the not-for-profit worker in Info Exchange, WIE. Listen, these guys have been pounding Uber and the gig companies 2015. I'm really proud of them. I'll put my full weight behind you guys. Send me the stories. We'll expose these executive trash fools. The latter was set up by former Uber driver James Ferrer, who is now General Secretary of ADCU and Director of the WIE, and whose name should be familiar as he successfully sued Uber over its employment classification of UK drivers, forcing the company into a U-turn earlier this year when it finally announced it would treat drivers as workers after years trying to overturn successive employment tribunal rulings. Ferrar's next trick could be to bring a legal reckoning around the issue of algorithmic accountability in the so-called gig economy. Bring the lawsuit, Mr. Ferrer, and then send me a copy, and let's educate all these attorneys here in the United States so we can file the equivalent. It's got to be death by 1,000 cuts, death by 1,000 lawsuits. We've got to pound them until they get down on their knees and beg for forgiveness, right? Until we get our way, because we should never tolerate the shenanigans and the BS that this executive trash forces us to do. The action also looks timely as the UK government is eyeing making changes to the legal framework around data protection, which could extend to removing current protections that wrap certain types of AI-driven decisions. Workers are prompted to provide a real-time selfie and face dismissal if the system fails to match the selfie with a stored reference photo. The ADCU writes in a press release explaining how drivers experience Uber's system. In turn, private hire drivers who have been dismissed also faced automatic revocation of their private hire driver and vehicle licenses by Transport for London. The union says Uber's real-time facial recognition checks, which incorporate Microsoft's Face API technology, have been in use by the ride-hailing platform in the UK since March 2020. Uber introduced the selfie identity checks ahead of another hearing over its license renewal in London that followed an earlier suspension by the city's transport regulator, TfL, which has raised safety concerns over its operations for years, branding Uber not fit and proper to hold a private hire operator license in a shock denial of its license 4 years ago. Despite losing its license to operate in the UK capital all the way in 2019, Uber has been able to operate in the city continuously as it has appealed the regulatory action. They just appeal, buy time. That's their game plan. But they have an army of lawyers, including the arseholes Tony West and Randall Heimovicki. It gained a provisional 15-month license in 2018, though not the full 5-year term. Later, it got a 2-month license in 2019 with a laundry list of operational conditions from TfL before once again being denied a full license renewal in November 2019. Then in September 2020, Uber was granted a license renewal, but again, only for 18 months. So to say Uber's UK business has been under pressure over safety for years is putting it mildly. The ADCU notes that in September 2020, when the Westminster Magistrates Court most recently renewed Uber's license for London, it set a condition that the company must maintain appropriate systems, processes, and procedures to confirm that a driver using the app is an individual licensed by TfL and permitted by ULL to use the app. This condition facilitated the introduction of harmful facial recognition systems, the ADCU argues. Earlier this year, the ADCU and the WIE called for Microsoft to suspend Uber's use of its B2B facial recognition technology after finding multiple cases where drivers were misidentified and went on to have their license to operate revoked by the TfL. That's a lawsuit right there. Now the union says its lawyers will argue that facial recognition systems, including those operated by Uber, are inherently faulty and generate particularly poor accuracy results when used with people of color. And I'm pretty damn sure it's the same thing in the United States. We just haven't taken legal action yet. Under the terms of Uber's license to operate in London, the company reports failed driver identity checks to TfL, which can then revoke a driver's license, meaning he or she is unable to work as a private hire vehicle driver in the city. The ride-hailing giant also appears to use the same real-time facial verification identity check technology for both Uber drivers and Uber Eats couriers, even though the latter are delivering food, not ferrying passengers around. And in one letter seen by TechCrunch, in which TfL writes to an Uber driver to inform him that it is revoking his private hire license, the regulator makes reference to information provided by Uber regarding the driver's dismissal as an Uber Eats courier on account of a failed ID check carried out by Uber's sister company. That failed ID check as a food delivery courier then appears to be being used as a grounds by TfL to justify revoking the same person's private hire vehicle license on public safety grounds. It is recognized that the failed checks did not occur on a private hire operator's booking platform or while undertaking any bookings. It is also the case that there does not appear to have been any evidence to suggest that this type of behavior has taken place on the booking platform of a licensed private hire vehicle operator. However, the information that has been provided indicates that you have been seen to fail identification checks that have been conducted, writes TfL, with some particularly tortuous logic. This type of activity being identified on a platform does suggest a propensity to behave in the manner that has been alleged. It goes on before adding, when that is then considered in terms of a private hire driver, it does then have the potential to put the traveling public at risk. The letter concludes by informing the Uber driver that their license is being revoked and providing deals of how they can appeal the decision. Farah told us that several of the Uber drivers the union is representing had their licenses revoked by TfL after being dismissed by Uber for failing ID checks on Uber Eats, which Uber then reported to TfL, which he called disturbing. Commenting on the lawsuit, in a statement he added, to secure renewal of their license in London, Uber introduced a flawed facial recognition technology, which they knew would generate unacceptable failure rates when used against a workforce mainly composed of people of color. Uber then doubled down on the problem by not implementing appropriate safeguards to ensure appropriate human review of algorithmic decision making. The ADCU's legal representative, Paul Jennings, a partner of Bates Wells, describes the cases as enormously important, and with AI rapidly becoming prevalent in all aspects of employment, he suggested the challenge would establish important principles. Reached for comment on the legal action, an Uber spokesman claimed that the selfie ID check it uses features robust human review, telling us in a statement, our real-time ID check is designed to protect the safety and security of everyone who uses the Uber app by helping ensure the correct driver is behind the wheel. The system includes robust human review to make sure that this algorithm is not making decisions about someone's livelihood in a vacuum without oversight. So what they're saying, we're 100% correct. We never make mistakes. The company prefers to refer to the technology it uses for these real-time ID checks as facial verification rather than facial recognition, while its claim of robust human review implies that no Uber and Uber Eats account is deactivated solely as a result of AI. That's important because under the UK and EU law, individuals have a right not to be subject solely automated decisions that have legal or similar effect on them. And algorithmic denial of employment would very likely meet that bar. Hence, Uber's urging that its algorithmic identity checks do involve a human in the loop. However, the question of what constitutes meaningful human review in the context is key and something that courts will have to wrestle with at some point. Asked what steps Uber has taken to assess the accuracy of its facial verification technology, Uber would not provide a public comment, but we understand that an internal fairness research team has carried out an assessment to see whether the real-time ID check system performs differently based on skin color. However, we have not seen this internal research, so we are unable to confirm its quality, nor can we verify an associated claim that an essential assessment did not reveal meaningful evidence. Additionally, we understand Uber is working with Microsoft on ongoing fairness testing of the facial verification system with the aim of improving general performance and accuracy. Farah told TechCrunch that the union has won at least 10 appeals in the magistrates' court against driver dismissals by TfL that cite Uber's real-time ID checks. With Imran, Uber and TfL have already admitted they got it wrong, but he was out of work for 3 months. No apology, no compensation. Sue the bastards. In other case, Farah said appeals have focused on whether the driver in question was fit and proper, which is the test TfL applies. For these, he said the union made subject access requests to Uber ahead of hearing, asking for the driver's real-time ID data and an explanation for the failed check, but Uber never provided the requested data. In many of these cases, we got our costs, Farah told us, adding, this is unusual because public bodies have protection to do their job. He went on to suggest that the judges had taken a dim view on hearing that Uber had not given the ADCU the requested data and that TfL also either didn't get the data from Uber or two belatedly asked for data. At one Crown Court hearing, the judge actually adjourned and asked for TfL's counsel to phone TfL and ask why Uber had not given them the data and if they ever expected to get it, he added. As you can see, we eventually did get pictures for PA and they are displayed in the Crowd Justice page, but we still cannot tell which of these pictures failed Uber's real-time ID check. TechCrunch asked Uber for a copy of its Data Protection Impact Assessment DPIA for real-time ID check system, which should have considered the technology's risks to individuals' right, but the company did not respond to our question. Typical Uber. We have asked to see a copy of this before and have never been sent one. We also asked TfL for a copy of the DPIA, for it told us that the regulator refused to release the document despite the ADCU making a Freedom of Information request for it. At the time of writing, TfL was not available for comment, asked for his view on why the regulator is so keen on the facial recognition checks. Farrar suggested that by getting Uber to carry out the sort of self-enforcement, it sets a de facto regulatory standard without TfL having to define an actual standard, which would require it to carry out proper due diligence on key details such as equality impact assessment. I'm sure the same applies here to the United States. Have a great day. Thanks for listening.